today's World Insight. Chinese President Xi Jinping is in Moscow to meet Russian President Vladimir Putin. What do China-Russia ties mean for the world? And here is our host, Tian Wei.
Hello and welcome to World Insight with me, Tian Wei. Chinese President Xi Jinping is paying a state visit to Russia at the invitation of his Russian counterpart Vladimir Putin from March the 20th to the 22nd. In March 2013, President Xi chose Russia for his first trip abroad as Chinese president. 10 years later, Xi again picks Russia for his first overseas visit following his re-election. Over the past decade, the two heads of state have met each other 40 times. The trip is highly anticipated throughout the world. So what does this trip say about China's statesmanship? And what's the focus of the visit? Before we loop in our panelists, let's take a look at this first.
The two countries established diplomatic ties in 1949. In 2011, China and Russia elevated their ties to a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination. 2019 marked the 70th anniversary of the diplomatic ties. Both agreed to upgrade their relations to a comprehensive strategic partnership of coordination for a new era. In 2021, the two sides officially announced the extension of the China-Russia Treaty of Good Neighborliness and Friendly Cooperation. High-level exchanges between the two countries have been frequent, forming the practice of annual mutual visits by the heads of state. The two sides have deepened political mutual trust and firmly supported each other on issues involving core interests such as sovereignty, security, and development. China and Russia maintain close strategic coordination in international and regional affairs. Both have agreed to step up communication and coordination within multilateral bodies, including the UN, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, BRICS, and the G20. Beijing says China and Russia have found a path of major country relations featuring strategic trust and good neighborliness. China pointed out that their ties are based on non-alliance, non-confrontation, and non-targeting of third parties. China said the more unstable the world becomes, the more imperative it is for China and Russia to steadily advance their relations.
In Moscow, we have Alexander Lukin, academic head of the Institute of China and Contemporary Asia of the Russian Academy of Sciences. In Beijing, we have Wang Yiwei, Jean Monnet Chair Professor, Director of the Institute of International Affairs, and also Director of the Center for European Studies with Renmin University of China. Both gentlemen have a lot of titles. Certainly, we're going to dip into many of the issues related to their titles. First of all, these bilateral visits, the world is paying its attention. Professor Wang, now the two presidents, China and Russia, are in talks. What exactly are you expecting out of these bilateral discussions?
First, three dimensions to understand of China-Russian relations. First, international system. Now the world is a dramatic change. The UN-led multipolar system and WTO-centric world trade system is in danger. Now Japan and Germany rearmed. So-called the built according to the democracy summit indicate that global supply chain globalization is in a transition. So China and Russia are the two permanent members of the United Nations Security Council should safeguard of the UN-led system. And second of the two major countries, China and Russia relations is a model of the great power relations. That is, as three knows, not alliance, not seek confrontation, and not to target any third party. I think that's very important. SCO is one of the major platforms to cooperate in that. And number three dimension, I think, is leaders trust each other, respect each other, and appreciate each other. And strong leaders, both in China and in Russia. President Xi Jinping met President Putin for three 30 times and more than, and nearly 40 times. So they understand each other, and the working relations is also very good.
Professor Lukin, do you see this more bilateral, or it's likely to be more discussions about other issues?
I think it will be both, because Russia and China are good neighbors, and of course they have a lot of bilateral things to discuss. First of all, the political relationship. By the way, this visit is a continuation of a mechanism which began in 1990s of bilateral visits of heads of states. And this time it was the turn of the Chinese leader to come to Russia. This mechanism was kind of postponed during the pandemic, and the leaders were meeting, but they were meeting basically online. So now this is the continuation of normal work, I would say, normal cooperation. This is a political part of it. There is also an economic part, of course, because China is Russia's major, first most important trading partner since 2010, if you count by countries. Now the significance of China as a trading partner is growing for Russia because the trade with its traditional partners, European partners, are going down significantly because of the international situation. So Asian partners, the role of Asian partners are growing, and of course the major Asian partner is China for Russia. Our trade is, last year was $150 billion, and this year it's expected to reach $200 billion, which is quite a lot if we think about the size of Russian economy, for example, so it's quite good. Right. So, and there will be a lot of, and there will be, of course, a lot of international issues, including regional conflicts, and of course, this would mostly the international observers would focus on that part, of course, but there are other parts as well.
Right. In President Xi Jinping's signed article on Russian national press and his speech on the arrival at the airport, he reiterated that the two sides are committed to no alliance, no confrontation, and not targeting any third party in developing bilateral ties. Now, Professor Lukin, rather before the meeting of the two presidents, we saw that the Chinese foreign minister in talks with his counterparts from Ukraine. So how should we understand the overall different levels of discussions that China is having with players of the region? And how do you see, as a result of that, the significance of this trip of China being a major power partner of Russia?
Well, I think it's very important that, as you said earlier, that President Xi Jinping chose again Russia as the first country for its overseas trip after being re-elected, as he did in 2013, of course, when he came to power first. And by the way, he was not the first Chinese leader to do that, because the policy of friendship and cooperation with Russia has a long history. And of course, I would say that it would have been nothing special if the things were normal in the international situation. But now the international situation is particularly tense. So it's, of course, a symbolically, this thing is very important, that he came to Russia as his first overseas visit after being re-elected, because I think that President Xi wants to stress that Russia remains China's most important strategic partner. And of course, in this situation, when Russia's relations with the West is are quite bad at the moment. This kind of means support for Russia, I would say, and its international stance. And of course, the leaders are going to discuss all kinds of international issues, including this European crisis at the moment. But as I said, this is not the only thing they need to discuss.
Right. Professor Wang, your thoughts?
Well, this time I think it's also 10 years before when President Xi visited Moscow and delivered a very important speech at the Moscow International Relations University about the Community of Shared Future on the basis of the new security concept. I think that's very important to understand. If you think about China's initiative, global development initiative, global security initiative, and the global civilization initiative. And also, I think this is a framework and also a concept to understand China's role in the mediation of the Ukraine crisis.
All right, let's talk about some specifics. China is Russia's largest trading partner, particularly now. Now, what are the content of this trade, especially the biggest shares of this trade? How are we going to see the nature of bilateral trade evolving as, let's just say, geopolitical and international environment evolves? Professor.
Firstly, China and Russia, both sides are the biggest neighborhood for each other. And Russia comparative advantage with China is very complementary. You know, Russia rich of the resources and energy, and China is a water factory. So this collaboration is a huge potential, not just at the central government level, but local government level as well. And also because of the sanctions by the West. So Russia, I think, more and more maybe looks to the east. And China also, we have northeastern provinces development projects. So the synergy of the strategies is a huge potential. So now this time, President Xi also will think about some new energy cooperation project, and also to bypass of the so-called SWIFT system, the internationalization, RMB and the currency, digital currency. All of these contribute a huge potential for the further cooperation.
Professor Lukin, from your perspective, how is Russia shaping its future trade relations with China as situations evolve?
Well, Russia is, of course, selling to China whatever it can. And of course, the largest part of Russia's export are natural gas and oil. And China is now buying quite a lot of Russian natural resources, and this is quite natural because, and very helpful for Russia, by the way. It's both useful for Russia, in Russia's interest and in China's interest, because the price is, as commentators say, is not that high, with a discount for China. And at the same time, but because Russia is selling more and more oil and gas, its revenue doesn't go down, so it has some money to balance its budget. Mm-hmm. Of course, Russia is trying also to promote other things for exports. For example, some food commodities and agricultural products. Mm-hmm. And Russia buys from China more and more machinery. I think it's now more than 50% of China's exports to Russia. Mm-hmm. You know, we have problems with the West and also with Japan and the United States. We have less American and European cars now, automobiles. So we can see in our streets more and more Chinese automobiles. They are becoming more and more popular. This is just the most visible part of it, but of course, in all other kinds of machinery, Chinese machinery is becoming more and more widespread in Russia, I would say.
Professor Lukin has been talking about the pragmatic cooperation, for example, in the areas of trade? What about the strategic coordination, as both of these phrases were mentioned in the letter written by Chinese president before going to Russia? Now, Professor Wang, tell me more about that, because we have seen both sides trying to emphasize their coordination within the UN, UN Security Council, and also at SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization, or SICA, Interaction and Confidence Building Mechanisms in Asia, and also in BRICS. BRICS is standing for the organization bringing all the emerging economies together. So how do you see strategic coordination, quote unquote, this phrase? How should we interpret it?
Among all the 85 comprehensive strategic partnerships for China's foreign policy, Russia is the only the name of the comprehensive strategic partnership for coordination. But this full coordination is very crucial, as two P5 countries in the UN system, and also the major powers, multipolar world, and strategically coordination is very crucial to safeguard the World War II system and also global stability, strategic stability. Now, NATO expansion, global NATO, and also the Americans rebuilt of their alliance systems like AUKUS and Indo-Pacific. All of this, if China and Russia can cooperate, I think that's the major hope for
But on this security
multipolar.
issue, if I can, Professor Wang, China has been very keen to make sure it's not all of these multilateral mechanisms that we mentioned earlier, from SCO to SICA to BRICS. Not all of them will be part of the security discussion, but rather some will be about security and trade, but others will remain totally trade and economic. So how do you see China's selection or choices, preference in this regard?
Well, of course, a multipolar world is not just a security. Politically, economically, it's very diverse, and otherwise it's unipolar or the bipolar, as it's more dangerous for the world, the so-called new Cold War. And secondly, not just a multipolar, but also democratization in international relations. That's also very crucial. Otherwise, it's so-called in the name of the rules-based international order, bypass of the UN system. This time it's 20 years anniversary with the Iraq war. It's definitely it's the worst case of that. So China and Russia cooperate to make sure that the world will be running according to the World War II system, the multipolar approach, and not just a unipolar way.
Professor Lukin, Chinese and Russian presidents are likely to have discussions. Now they're having quite a formal discussion, but they're also likely in the next few days to have some rounds of informal dialogues in a way. That is according to some specific information coming from both sides. So what does that mean in terms of trying to figure out solutions to some of the biggest issues of security that the world is watching very closely?
Well, let's begin with security again. I think that the main thing that Russia and China share are the principles of international security. Well, I think if I understood this correctly, this article by President Xi, he came out with a very interesting, very positive idea, very interesting idea that the future of the world security cannot be, which is, of course, as we know, according to him, is should be based on the principle of common destiny, cannot be based on the principle of divisive security. Security is indivisible, which means that one part of the world cannot increase its own security at the expense of another part. So this is exactly the vision of Russia, because Russian leaders have been saying about it for a long time. Like the West, for example, NATO cannot increase its security at the expense of, say, Russia or China. And this is our common vision, because in the future multipolar world, there will be several poles, but Russia and China give an example of the poles that cooperate with each other. That's the world that we need. And I think coming to your this idea of private talks between our leaders, this means that their personal relationship are very close, and I would think that they probably want to discuss some, I would say, important issues without other people interrupting them, and probably come to some kind of principal agreements that after that can be developed by, ministers, foreign ministers, defense ministers, and other people. But they want to discuss these things personally. This usually says that about the particular closeness of personal relationship of the leaders.
Professor Wang, your thoughts? Earlier, we have seen China put forward this proposal for ceasefire on some of the latest conflicts in the region. Now, how do you see this latest interaction between the two presidents during Chinese President Xi Jinping's state visit to Russia this time, likely to provide the momentum and impetus, using the word quoted by both presidents, to provide some kinds of hope, in a way, to solve the problems?
Indeed, as President Putin contributed an article in today's People's Daily, again highlights the principles of the indivisible security, which actually in 1975 in the Helsinki Art Treaty, the West also agreed in NATO, which also included the human rights in indivisible security. But now the West betrayed that principles. And China, of course, echoed that kind of principle that we used with the new security concept, a global security initiative, the common security. Always said that one side security should not be on the base of other sides' insecurity or unsafety. So that is security is our commons. It's not because we are living in the same planet. So it's very crucial. If like the NATO expansion at the cost of the Russians' unsafety, it's called the Ukraine crisis. So we need to address the security challenges by joint consultation, mutual benefits, not just on the one side unilateral approach.
China has been claiming from the very beginning that it is neutral in terms of what is going on in the region, that specific conflict. Now, Professor Wang, as this interaction between the presidents of China and Russia are ongoing, the world is watching very closely. Of course, what is happening bilaterally between the two countries are extremely important. After all, they are both big economies and important players at the UN Security Council, not to mention some of the other platforms. But also, what others' perceptions about what's going on might also, in a way, shape the future directions of events. So on that, Professor Wang, what is your analysis of what is going on right now between the two countries, about the two countries, and what is going on right now between the two countries about how they want the world to understand how things are evolving?
I think there are three advantages for China in mediating the Ukraine crisis or other hotspots challenges. First, China is Asian civilization. We are more inclusive thinking. It's not just one side against another, zero-sum game. It's not Chinese mentality. So we always against the Cold War mentality. So that's the reason recently China also successfully to make Iran and Saudi they rebuilt the diplomatic ties. Since China had both good relations with Saudi and Iran. Now in the Ukraine also, China has good relations with both Russia and Ukraine. So we trust each other. I think that's very important. And secondly, politically, China is independent foreign policy for a peaceful development. We are not interfere domestic affairs. We are not join one side against another side. So it's not like the U.S. sells weapons to Ukraine against Russia and want to weaken Russia. China is not that kind of approach. We never, it's like a so-called sells weapons to Russia or put some oil in the fire. So both sides need China to be mitigated, and the ceasefire is hope for holdable. It's a spillover effect, including humanitarian crisis, and also food and energy crisis. All these need to be addressed. And China as a developing country and emerging country, and also the second world economy. So all these multi-identities is also the hope for China to play the very important role. I think in the future, and ceasefire, and then China be the guarantee, one of the guarantees of the P5 for security and peace negotiation.
Right. But it's not just how important China is. It is also about the momentum of situations with the parties involved. Now, Professor Lukin, what do you make of China's role? And how do you see the bilateral layer of the latest meeting, and also a responsible outcome of this meeting or meetings between the two presidents for the rest of the world?
Well, China is playing more and more important and positive role in the international arena. I would mention, for example, China's role in normalization of relations between Iran and Saudi Arabia, which took place in Beijing a few days ago. And I think this is very important. China also presented this 12-point plan for improving situation in the Ukraine, and which is also, I think, very important, and Russia basically greeted it. Unfortunately, it was rejected by the United States, and President Biden said that it was also only in the interest of Russia, which is entirely incorrect, of course. So I think that the more active and China is in the international arena, the more positive role it's going to play, and Russia can only support it. And of course, this will be one of the points of one of the themes of discussion between the two presidents.
All right. Before we go, Professor Wang, your final thoughts.
Of course, it's like Churchill said, that Georgia joy is better than World War. I think they have some problems. It's a very comprehensive and deeper historical and cultural rooted, but we need peace and stability in Europe, in the world.
Now, China has been describing this trip made by Chinese President Xi Jinping to Russia as one with about friendship and peace. Certainly, we are going to see that being demonstrated by the results of the discussions between the two presidents. Thank you so much, Alexander Lukin and Wang Yiwei. Thank you for joining us. That's all the time we have for today. If you'd like to know more, search World Insight or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter and Facebook. I'm Tian Wei on behalf of the team. Thanks for being with us. Bye for now.